landscape architect at the New York City Parks Department. I'm a director of green infrastructure within forestry, horticulture, and the natural resources group. And I'm also the project manager managing Mark A. Morrison Landscape Architecture for the construction of the Pleasant Greenway within Van Cortlandt Park. Really appreciate your time to consider this project today. This isn't the first time that the project was due for the Design Commission. It was actually approved previously in 2011. But through the process to get a freshwater wetlands permit with the state DEC, there were significant delays, and there was a public hearing held, out of which a wetland mapping exercise needed to be undertaken. And through the time that it took to get all of that work done, our previous approval for the project expired. But this also gave us an opportunity also to relook at the project and look at some of the details there and see how we could also respond better to both the wetland mapping report and some of the community concerns. We'll talk a bit more about that later. Just to remind you about what this project is all about, we're creating a new greenway that makes the missing link from the South County Trail, which runs up to Westchester, actually 80 miles north all the way to Brewster, and it stops right at the county line in the Bronx. And below the Pleasant Greenway, you'll see later in the project, we have the Mosholu Greenway. So this is a missing link between Westchester and the Bronx for the regional greenway and bikeway system. The length of the trail is about 1¼ miles, and we have a budget of about $2.5 million for the work. This is where we're located, up at the north part of the Bronx, Westchester County line. And our project location runs pretty much through the center of the park. You see that it's kind of wedged between two golf courses through the center. And at the south terminus, where it meets up with the Mosholu Parkway, the Greenway, is down by Van Cortlandt Lake and the parking lot for the golf course itself. And this is the historical photo of the Greenway as it was in the 1800s. It's kind of highlighted here by this red line of where it was. It was an active greenway from the late 1800s all the way until the early 1980s, in fact. Passenger travel really declined in the 1920s, but there still was freight activity all the way until the 80s, at which point it was handed over to the city. This here is looking again at that regional context of the greenway system. Here in blue you have the South County Trail. This here dotted line is our missing link. And then here we have the Mosholu Greenway that connects up to the Pelham Parkway Greenway and other bike path systems in the Bronx. Here a little bit closer to see exactly where those connections are being made. Here at the top, South County Trail, and down here by the parking lot, as I mentioned, by Van Cortlandt Lake is where we connect up with the Mosholu Greenway. Also noted that there is some subways also nearby, sort of also connection with the connectivity regionally with alternative transportation system. This here there's a lot of trails within the park, and existing trails through the park, and in the wooded areas that we look at up here and over here. One thing to sort of note as a big park, besides just connecting with the regional alternative transportation system, is we're creating a fully accessible trail. And as it is currently within the wooded areas here, the naturalist kind of areas to go and see nature and be in the woods, there isn't a single fully accessible trail to bring people into the woods. And so a really great side benefit of the project is that we're bringing that accessibility and opening these woods up to a whole host of new users. This here is just some of the community resources that are near the trail. Here we put dots for a lot of the schools. They certainly have users that would benefit by having a fully accessible, safe trail for their disabled students to use. Also just noted some of the other organizations that are nearby who are using this trail. Now we'll take a little stroll up the trail. We'll be a jog. We'll go through the pictures quickly. But here we are at the south entrance, coming in from the parking lot here. And then this is the first bridge. On the right, we have Van Cortlandt Lake, and on the left is continuation of the lake and wetlands over there. Here we're continuing up north. You'll notice in the south, until we get to the second bridge, it's fairly wide, and you'll see the character change as we cross this bridge, the second bridge of Van Cortlandt Lake, and the nature and the character of the trail, as you can see, gets more rustic, more forested, more naturalistic. And that's something, as we go through our design changes, something that we wanted to consider for the design of the Greenway. Here you can see some of the old railroad ties. You'll notice in some pictures there's railroad ties on where the beaten path is, and in some areas there isn't. And that's another change that comes up later that we've made that we think improves the design significantly. This is a side spur going off, looking at one of the earthen trails, more naturalistic, narrow, I would call single track trail that goes up into the woods. This is a culvert that handles some of the drainage that comes off of the golf courses along the trail. Some additional pictures. Here we see one of the trees, significant trees that will come up actually in later photos of how we're protecting that tree. Another photo. And another one. It's very nice, beautiful area. And here, as I mentioned, this is we're going to be making that connection to this seeming bridge to nowhere at this point. And linking up to here, this path goes from this border all the way up to Brewster. And they actually have funding to bring it farther north up into Dutchess County as well. So it's obviously a beautiful place, and a lot of people love to use this space. And so when we kind of came back and we're looking at the design for the project, we really wanted to focus and identify who the stakeholders were. There's multiple stakeholders in the project. Between the community, Department of Transportation of the state, they're administrators of the grant. We have Department of Environmental Conservation, and as the operator, the Parks Department as well. All of these folks have requirements, guidelines, concerns that we're trying to balance to make a great project. The community, first and foremost. The community is interested in having safe access for everyone. So having it for bicycles, people in strollers, the disabled, as many people that can use it as possible. Also the connection to nature is very, very important. As you saw on the pictures, it's a very beautiful wooded area, and it's very important to the community and us, frankly, to retain that character and to minimize our disturbance, and in fact, enhance the local ecology along the trail to make it, to improve the site instead of just disturbing it. Department of Transportation has really requirements based about safety and material. It first and foremost has to be fully accessible, not accessible on day one, but it has to be accessible over the 10 to 15 year lifespan that's expected of the trail. It has to be durable, it has to last a long time, it has to be safe. Safety sort of gets tied into the geometry and the slopes, and there's specific requirements that have to be met. Safety DOT does have purview to review the final design before we can move forward. As I mentioned before, State Department of Environmental Conservation, we are within the buffer zone of a freshwater wetlands, so we do need to apply for a freshwater wetlands permit. That will come later on after we develop construction documents, and they are the agency responsible to make sure that we don't disturb the landscape during construction or minimize our disturbance during construction, and that the aftermath of our project doesn't harm the wetlands that we're building near. And as the operator, Parks is also a critical stakeholder. We have to make sure that this is operating for the 15 to 20 year lifespan that the project is expected to last. We need materials that are easily repairable. We need it safe. Parks also has invested very heavily in the ecology in Vancouver Park. We have restoration foresters stationed within the park. We've done a significant amount of work in the contiguous forested areas, and we want to continue that within the park to make sure that we not only protect but enhance the ecology there. So with that all in mind, we kind of went back and looked at the previous design here, and what was proposed was a 10-foot asphalt path from right from the south beginning all the way to the north terminus. It had a jogging path on one side and a 2-foot required buffer on the other side. And as we looked at this and looked at the conditions, as you saw in the photos, that the conditions really do change as you go from that south part of the park and you head north. And so what we were looking at was how we could create maybe multiple typologies that would respond to the changing conditions as you moved along the path. There was also some kind of general sort of techniques that we used along the path to try and address some of the concerns mainly of the community and from the DEC hearings that we held. Those are related both to safety and to environmental protection. I'll go through some of the things we did environmentally, and this is across the board no matter what type of path we're using. The previous path, the previous proposal, was prioritizing the existing railroad ties. So whether the railroad ties were where the current beaten path were, or whether the railroad ties were where there were saplings and shrubs and things growing. The path was moving along where the railroad ties were. And we decided as a way to reduce our site disturbance, that we would follow the existing beaten path, because it already is a disturbed part of the area there. And we were able to significantly reduce the amount of disturbance in the forested areas just by making that change across the board. Another subtle but significant change over 1.25 miles was the previous proposal had the path built at grade. And so in order to install the base material and the asphalt itself, we had to do a significant amount of excavation. And even though it's only 10 feet wide, when you have it over 1.25 miles, we were able to reduce the excavation required and the removal of that material by over 600 cubic yards. Then on to safety. It's going to be a mixed-use path. There's going to be bicyclists, walkers, joggers, all expected to be using this at the same time. So in addition to the signage and the speed limit postings that we'll have, we wanted to implement some what I call traffic calming techniques and transfer that over into the greenway. So although the path is relatively flat, where there is some grade change, we wanted to actually emphasize the undulations in the landscape there, so that those subtle hills would slow the traffic down. Also, the path isn't going to be perfectly straight. We're going to be avoiding significant trees, trying to get as far away from them as we can, and just following the beaten path. So instead of trying to make the path as straight as possible, we're actually accentuating those curves as another sort of traffic calming technique to slow down traffic. And then we get into some different materials. We wanted to look at what the different options were out there, and look at what our requirements were, both from parks and all the stakeholders, and then balance that out. And this matrix is sort of a summary of our analysis of the different things. And the critical things we were looking at was, is it ADA compliant? Is the material durable? Meaning, is it going to be able to last for 15, 20 years that it's supposed to? Also kind of ties into performance. On a rainy day like today, when it stops raining, how long will it take for someone to be able to go back on that path without it being muddy and sticky? And that. Also, permeability was something we looked at. We knew that we were within the buffer zone of our freshwater wetlands, so we wanted to consider how we would be able to manage that stormwater coming off of the path to protect the wetlands. So from that analysis, we came up with 3 different trail types, depending on the conditions. At the top, we just have the previous design, the 10-foot path, with an aggregate run jacket trail next to it. And what we've done is we've actually made different types that respond to the conditions. So the first trail type is whenever we're within the buffer zone of the freshwater wetlands. And what we've done there is we're hoping as much as possible of an 8-foot path. We're working with DOT about how much 8-foot versus 10-foot path we need. But we're going to include a drainage swale to one side to manage the stormwater that would come off that, both to capture the water and the sediment that would be potentially coming off the path to protect the wetlands. When we're outside of that buffer zone, we are going to have an 8 to 10-foot path with just a vegetated buffer on the 2 sides. And in that case, we're over 100 feet from the wetlands, and the path is adjacent to very pervious forested landscape. So the reason we didn't include a bioswale in those locations is, from our calculations, it just doesn't seem necessary. And then the third board type that we have, which is the most dramatic change, is a concrete boardwalk material. This we're using when we're adjacent to the significant native trees. They mostly just happen to be also within the wetland buffer zone. This is a pervious material, and it also allows us to use pier footings or screw pile footings so that we can bridge over and protect the tree roots that are there. Another benefit that I like about the boardwalk is aesthetically, to me, it breaks up it breaks up the sort of monotony potentially of just an asphalt material. Again, to slow down the traffic of the bicycles, and also aesthetically, I feel that the boardwalk fits in very nicely, sort of with that forested aesthetic. So here's an image of trail type 1. As I mentioned, here's the bioswale on one side, asphalt path with a vegetated buffer. This is trail type 2 when we're outside of the wetland buffer zone. 8 to 10-foot path with, again, the vegetated buffer on each side. And trail type 3, here's an image of a concrete boardwalk being installed. Ours actually would be a slightly different color. We're looking at integral brown with a sandblast finish, which has a really nice grip to it. And here's an image sort of what it would look like in situ. You can see sort of this tree here from the previous picture. And here it is with that in section with the boardwalk installed. And here we kind of looked at how we looked at the absolute critical root zone and then being able to locate our screw piles outside of that root zone to try and minimize any conflicts we would have with significant roots. So what did we get out of all of these changes? As I mentioned, site disturbance. By realigning the path, we were actually able to reduce the site disturbance by a full 25%. We were able to reduce excavation by 50%. We're going to be treating 100% of a 2.9-inch rain event with the bioswale. And 15 additional mature trees will be protected by the change in material to the boardwalk. Now we'll go through. Unfortunately, in order for it to be readable, we're going to be in 8 sections, but we're going to again be going from the south, beginning of the path up north. The colors, part of the middle, obviously, is the path. Our blue hatching is the wetland. And then those locations came out of the wetland mapping report that was conducted last summer. And then these dotted lines represent 100 feet off the path. So wherever these blue hatch marks cross over, like right here, so here, from here this way, we are in the wetland buffer zone. And you'll notice that our path changes, it corresponds right to that location. So we'll head north to, this is the Van Cortlandt Lake, this is the bridge. And we continue on to the path. Here we see our first section of boardwalk as we get more to the northern part in that more rustic, narrow area.
Isn't there also an outlook?
That comes up on the.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's two outlooks along the way. Here's another section of boardwalk. And here we are at the top of the terminus. Also along the path we have 2 lookouts that look out over Van Cortlandt Lake. They're actually on each side of the path. They're actually existing there, but we're going to formalize them and also formalize the edge. Right now there's some erosion from these lookouts going into the wetland as it stands, and we'll be able to stabilize that edge and protect it. I think another nice side benefit of these lookouts is it's another way to slow down the bicycle traffic. If you have more things to look at, more interest along the trail, people are less likely to be zooming along. This is a plan view of the north entrance into the park. And here's a rendering of what it will look like. This is the existing condition of an asphalt path going to nowhere, and we will have somewhere for it to go. We've included these, actually, this treatment was from the previous design that we went through using granite bollards on the edges and a center metal bollard that's removable. ATVs are an issue here, so we're including bollards at both the north where they're really the problem, but also at the south end so that we can protect the trail and the woods from the ATVs and the misuse. Here's in situ, the granite entryway. We're still working a little bit on what the exact text will be here. And then this is a plan view at the south end, coming off the Mosherwood Parkway from the parking lot at the golf course. And this is a plan view looking into that. We've located all of our signage because we do want to retain that rustic feel and the markings that would typically be on a greenway, just to the entry points. There really isn't any other entry points coming into the trail, so this way we can maintain, again, that rustic character. Another thing we're going to be doing along the entire length, I've mentioned sort of not just protecting the landscape, but trying to improve it, is we're going to be removing a significant amount of the, pretty much all of the invasive species that we see along the length of the trail there. Taking out also any dangerous trees that are falling over, about to fall. And then in the understory we're going to be planting native trees, shrubs, and herbaceous layer throughout along the entire 1¼ miles. These are some of the species that would be planted there. All native species that, working with our NRG group and our Staten Island Native Plant Nursery and the horticulturists there, are all appropriate to the local ecology. This is kind of a chart just summarizing our tree work there. All of the trees we noted have been identified from Bronx Forestry as being dead, dying, or dangerous. And there's 22, and our new project will be planting over 450 new trees. These are are some of the furnishings that you see. I mentioned the bollards previously. Now these two, the garbage can and the bike rack, will only be located by the south parking lot there. We won't be putting this style of garbage can in the woods. Doesn't seem very appropriate, so we'll keep it out in the more park-like area by the golf course itself. This is samples of some of the signage and the markings that go on the pavement. We'll be continuing to work with DOT to finalize exactly what goes where. So, in summary, we talked a lot about the stakeholders, and our goal really was to balance all of these kind of either complementary or seemingly competing interests. But I think this design really does provide the safe access to the community. There's fully ADA accessible path into the woods and Quorum Park, which isn't currently there. We think that we're actually going to be able to enhance the ecology there by removing invasive species and doing significant restoration along the path. We'll be able to improve the ecology there. We're going to have a safe layout and materials. It meets state DOT guidelines, and we will be going obviously for a freshwater wetlands permit and be working continuously with DC to make sure that we protect the wetlands, both during construction and post. And our operational requirements have also been met. And with that, I'll leave it open to commissioners.
Actually, before the commissioners are public, but thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation.
Thank you.
I'm going to call on each one of you requested to speak in order of the way you listed yourself. Just in advance, if I won't hear your name, I apologize, and just feel free to correct me. You'll have 3 minutes to provide your testimony, and we will give you a 30-second warning.
20-second warning.
You'll have a 20-second warning. So the first speaker is
Neil.
Neil Reisman.
Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Neil Weissman. I am past president of New York Cycle Club, and on behalf of its 2,000 members, I would like to speak in support of the parks plan for the Putnam Greenway. Personal history, I have advocated for expanded cyclist access on trains, roads, and bridges, and there's a ride in there that led over 500 rides in the tri-state area, and including virtually every bike path in the region. Before I comment about the parks plan, I'd like to describe what it will be connecting to, which is the North-South County Trailway, which stretches 50 miles from the Westchester border up to Brewster over the old Putnam Rail right-of-way. It's one of the longest, most heavily used and popular recreational mixed-use facilities in the region. It winds through towns, wetlands, and nature preserves, all on discrete paths, fully protected from car traffic, affording all users a safe and enjoyable experience. This is important because given that New York City DOT has committed to creating just 5 miles of protected bike lanes per year, or only 1 mile per borough, the parks plan will give the Bronx 50 years worth of improvements in one stroke. So that's what it means to the Bronx. What I appreciate most about the parks proposal as a cyclist is that it doesn't feel like a rail trail, which has mostly straight sections, minimal grades, fairly wide. It can get monotonous. Where this is, even though it shares the same rail bed as the Westchester facility, the Putnam hews more closely to the contours of the terrain. It feels more like a river trail, similar to the Bronx River Greenway and sections of the Bethpage Bikeway out in Long Island. It has respect, and its close proximity to adjoining trees and vegetation make for a path that's curvy, intimate, and fun, and makes cyclists feel like they're going fast even though they're not. Speaking strictly as a cyclist, this is one really cool design. So thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Edith Cranalisi.
I am the, I'm sorry. I'm the Vice President of Legislative Affairs for a disability group known as Disabled in Action. We've been in existence since 1974. One of the major issues for people with nature often. You end up going to for example, the wonderful where they built a boat landing in Washington Inwood by Columbia, and it's got pebbles. Now you're in a wheelchair. You're on pebbles. It's not, you sink. You're destroying the nature way, whatever you want to call it. I personally have been on the Putnam Trail probably about a dozen times now. And we finally worked out coming from the Broadway end and going as far as we can go and turning around. Unfortunately, that leaves out the most scenic and interesting part of the trail, which is the upper trail. The current situation on the trail is fairly dangerous for people in wheelchairs. I've gotten stuck every time we've gone. It's been problematic, and I understand people wanting a nature as they perceive it, but I think we all have to have some move in it. There are many nature trails throughout the city, and there's a lot of blacktop. That may not be the thing that most people want, but I will say that even blacktop is problematic. In Inwood Hills Park, there's the entire section by the Indian mounds, by the shell mounds. That's all washed out. That's completely inaccessible. I believe I should be able to see that area, to go through that area, to enjoy that, and we can't. It's a the entire issue of the different types of surfaces. There are surfaces approved by the ADA, but they require
20 seconds.
a tremendous amount of maintenance. Blacktop is easy, and we would hope that this would be approved. Thank you.
Thank you. George Vasos.
That's okay. Most people don't get it right the first time. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank the Parks for that great presentation, because now you understand why I'm standing in front of you. My name is George Patsalas. I'm a lifelong resident of the Bronx and an almost daily beneficiary of Van Cortlandt Park's natural beauty. I am here to represent Save the Putnam Trail, a group of Bronx residents and park users who want Van Cortlandt Park to maintain its current natural aesthetics. We believe asphalt or permeable pavement in a forever wild preserve and wetlands is not aesthetic, it's not contextual to its surroundings. The area is a quiet retreat, you can see from the photos, that offers tranquility under sheltering trees, surrounded by underbrush, where residents can go, find renewal, recreation, education, or just plain peace. Widening and paving the trail would negatively impact these activities permanently. On the design itself, asphalt or similar pavement would increase CSOs into waterways due to the presence of a combined sewer outlet at the lake, as well as cause further erosion to nearby surroundings. Furthermore, it will encourage and promote an increasing speed in traffic. Anybody who doesn't think that's true just needs to cross 53rd Street and Broadway. The trail is the only flat path in the park which connects to marsh and forever wild preserves, and a softer surface is consistently aesthetic to these connections, as well as easier on the joints for pavement-weary New Yorkers. Asphalt hard surfaces contribute to climate change. We believe a design using a natural surface, such as crushed rock or compacted soil, would be more beneficial and constructive. Natural surfaces are ADA compliant, considered maintainable, and able to be funded using this federal money. A design with a natural surface would have a much lower runoff rate, be able to filter water in place to improve lake and brook water, and it would add to the safety by slowing traffic down as it does today. There are bicyclists on that path all day long. Erosion stories about the trails are exactly that. They're stories. With very little maintenance, the current trail has not washed away in 40 years since the railroad stopped running, and it didn't wash away the 100 years before that. We supplied in our submitted written testimony examples of successful trails located in wetland areas around the state. Some have said that the railroad some have said that because a railroad existed here, when the city was far less urbanized, the trail is a transportation corridor. I'd like to point out that the portion of the trail was a rail line. The land was occupied by indigenous people prior, who respected nature, then by settlers, and later by the rail line, that ran on a natural surface of rock and soil, still low erosion railroad land. The new mission of the pathway should be to restore it as close as possible to its former state. We hope the Commission agrees that any design using public money should be contextual to the surroundings, observant of environmental impacts, and faithful to the scope of history. The proposal in its current form should not be approved. I'd like to remind you, it's called the Putnam Trail, not the Putnam Road.
Time.
Thank you. Matthew Toro?
Yes. I've printed a half a dozen copies.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Hello, my name is Matthew Turov, and I live in Community Board 8 in the Bronx. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. During my nearly 15 years living near Van Cortlandt Park and being a regular visitor, I've come to see the Putnam Trail as a vital part of the freshwater wetlands that attract visitors to the park to experience a unique natural habitat for birds, wildlife, insects, trees, and plants. Because of the bucolic character of the trail, I feel that asphalt is the wrong choice for a redesigning of this trail. The current compact earth surface needs to be restored in places, for sure, but a wholesale alteration of the character of the trail would be out of keeping with the natural aesthetic of the area in which the trail runs. The Putnam Trail is currently used by walkers, nature lovers, runners, and cyclists. Teachers bring school groups there to study nature. One frequently sees parents with young kids riding bicycles slowly on the trail. By using a natural surface, the pace remains relaxed, allowing everyone to enjoy it. Paving it with asphalt will turn it into a transportation corridor. Yes, it was a rail trail until the early 1980s, but since then, decades of users have come to enjoy it as a nature trail. Time and again, it's been shown that if you pave a multi-use trail in an urban park, it becomes principally a bicycle path, good for one segment of users to the detriment of all others. I'd also like to address the South County Trailway, which is what the Putnam Trail connects with going north of Van Cortlandt Park. The South County Trailway, which is paved with asphalt, is often cited as the reason why the Putnam Trail needs asphalt. For the most part, it runs parallel to the Sawmill Parkway, often just a few feet from that busy parkway. It should not be considered a template for the Putnam Trail, which goes through Y01 protected wetlands in Forever Wild preserves. According to the Van Cortlandt Park Conservancy, quote, New York City once contained 224,000 acres of freshwater wetland. However, over the past 200 years, increasing demands of a growing metropolis have resulted in most of this land being filled with dredge. Only 2,000 acres of freshwater wetland remain in the city today. It's the very uniqueness of the Putnam Trail and its surrounding wetlands and forests that should qualify it for special treatment and planning. Asphalt is the least environmentally sensitive solution and the one that comes furthest from adhering to the present natural character of the trail. I urge the members of the Public Design Commission to reject asphalt on this trail. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Morris Falter.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Laura Spalter, and I oppose this plan for the following reasons. Universal design involves designing spaces so that the widest possible range of people can use them, wheelchair users and those with severe orthopedic disabilities. The Parks Department's plan to pave this unique trail with concrete and asphalt discriminates against and will exclude a whole class of physically challenged people. My husband has severe osteoarthritis in his knees. I suffer from rheumatoid arthritis, which affects my feet. Our doctors advised us to walk on soft, resilient surfaces to preserve and enhance our range of motion. Walking on concrete and asphalt is painful and damaging to many people. The Putnam Trail is a godsend to seniors and many others because it is the only trail in Van Cortlandt Park that is soft, shaded, and flat, and easily accessible. My enjoy walking on greenways with flexible, natural surfaces in every state that we visit. They are plentiful and ADA approved. This demonstrates that other surfaces can be used to meet the needs of all disabled people, including wheelchair users. Crushed stone, which is ADA compliant and recommended for use in environmentally sensitive areas like the Van Cortlandt Park freshwater wetlands, would provide the greatest access for all user groups, meeting both the letter and spirit of universal design. Wetlands remove carbon from the environment. They mitigate urban warming and clean water runoff before it enters our waterways. There are only 96 acres of freshwater wetlands left in the Bronx. 56 of those acres are located in Van Cortlandt Park. This plan has the potential to damage this resource. Much of the area of this trail has a high water table. Winter frost will cause the rigid asphalt to heave and crack. Inevitably, the degraded conditions would then be like broken sidewalk and potholes that would render the trail problematic to even more users. This plan is not in the best interest of the park, its users, its wildlife, flora, and fauna. I urge the PDC to deny preliminary and/or final approval until DEC has examined park's stormwater management plan, which is currently incomplete. And if I have one more second, all the signs look like street graffiti to me. People walk and ride on the Putnam today without any signage, and it's just ruins the character. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Argenti.
You may have received a document that Laura and I put together. It's a 46-page document with backup material. Today I'd like to just talk to you a little bit about how we need a stormwater pollution prevention plan that is adequate based on the fact that there is so much water in the area. If you look at the topo map, you can see that it goes from 200 to 20 in the park. The Tibbetts Brook watershed, which goes in Westchester County, goes at the tip of the golf course in Dunwoody. It's 300 feet above sea level, so there's a tremendous amount of water that's coming into the area along the Tibbetts Brook watershed and ends up at the lowest point, which is, of course, where the railroad trail was. And so what I'm trying to describe is that when you do a stormwater pollution prevention plan, and I was a member of a group that did that for the Kensko watershed, the drinking water in New York City, you need to have 5 things. One is a stormwater plan for the construction. One is an E&S plan, erosion and sediment control plan for the construction. One is a stormwater plan based on your design, not just the construction, but the design. That's not any place to be found. The fourth point is a monitoring plan to make sure that what you designed is actually working. And the 5th most critical point is maintenance. Maintenance is not a guideline for the Parks Department. It's a requirement of a stormwater pollution plan in a very fragile environment for Class 1 freshwater wetlands, which are just fading away. Now, they're doing a great job. They're impaired, and they have been impaired since 2002, and nobody is taking care of that impairment. But they're doing a good job. There is some testing going on, and when the water enters from Westchester, it's polluted, and by the time it gets down to the weir, it's pretty much in better shape. Basic testing. But it does go into the weir, which goes into the sewer at a rate of 4.5 million gallons a day. That's a tremendous amount of water. It comes from the 5 highways, the Marshalloo, the Henry Hudson, the Sawmill, and the Major Deegan, 4 highways. It comes from those 3 golf courses, and it comes from the topography that ends up at that point. I don't think at this particular point in the discussion that anybody knows what kind of material should be used. And I would suggest that the material be looked at further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Stephen Bowman.
Thank you. I'm Stephen Dowman. I'm the author of this document, which I emailed to the commission, and I understand was placed in its folders. For those of you who have read it, you won't be surprised to know that I'm a graduate engineer from MIT, and those of you who fell asleep while reading it are probably more certain of that. I'm here to answer any questions that you might have with regard to the technical aspects of the document. And looking at the controversy associated with, I've been amazed at the number of technical inaccuracies. If you don't have questions, I will go to the technical part, which is summarized in the summary. Essentially, this project was first proposed in 1939 by Commissioner Moses, and there's a reference to it with the clipping from the New York Times. It's just that it's not been something new. This is we're using federal highway funds, which means it should be a shared use path, not a nature trail. With regard to the path's surface, this is the most major thing, and whether it should be paved or unpaved. With regard to stone dust or crushed rock, or crushed stone, there's a major problem. It just does not last. There are examples shown in my document of where it's been used in Massachusetts, where the paths have self-destructed within 2 years of installation. In particular, with regard to stone dust, gravel or non-paved paths are universal throughout New England. And I excerpted something from the state of Maine's document with regard to building camp roads and so forth, which states don't use stone dust if you are going to use a non-paved surface, basically because it absorbs water. The second thing with regard that I've analyzed is with regard to the compatibility of a gravel path with regard to ADA compliance. This is the most important thing. In order for a gravel path to be durable, it should have a cross slope, which is the angle over to the sides, of 4% or greater. This provides adequate runoff for the water. You don't want water to seep in because not too many people technically can walk on water, which is what you would be underneath this gravel surface. Unfortunately, with regard to ADA compliance, the maximum cross slope is 2 degrees. So therefore, if you're going to build a non-durable path, 2 degrees is fine, you're ADA compliant. After 2 years, the path falls apart. If you want a durable path, it's not ADA compliant. I thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Next is Jennifer Scarlett.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify. My name is Jennifer Scarlett. I live in Community Board 8 in the Bronx, and I'm here representing a community organization called Bronx Climate Justice North. We have 120 members, and we are officially opposed to the Parks Department plan to asphalt pave and widen the Putnam Trail. I've also submitted a letter signed by, a long letter signed by 8 organizations citywide and in the Bronx, representing people all over the city who are opposed to this plan. My organization, in addition to folks in the North and Northwest Bronx, represents groups in the South Bronx, environmental justice groups who represent a lot of folks who cannot, afford to get out of the city to experience nature. And a lot of these people enjoy the Putnam Trail on a daily and weekly basis. From an aesthetic point of view, we wonder what possible sense it makes to lay asphalt and cut hundreds of trees, saplings, and understory through forever wild preserves. And along a wetland that holds New York State's highest protection classification. I would urge you all to visit the beautiful Putnam Trail and to bring friends and family. Words and photographs don't suffice to describe the beauty of the trail itself, the woodlands, the wetland, and Van Cortlandt Lake. I thought it was very telling, the presentation by the Parks Department, the moment where the gentleman showed a slide showing the paved trail coming into the unpaved Putnam Trail and saying, you know, here's the trail just coming into nothing. It's not coming into nothing. It's coming into a woodland and a wetland and a trail that, you know, folks have experienced for decades now with great pleasure. There are parks in New York City and around the country that have said no to wide asphalt trails and yes to surfaces like crushed stone, explicitly for reasons of aesthetics. Asphalt, which we urban dwellers are surrounded by in our daily lives, is a material that we deliberately seek escape from in retreating to wild parks like Van Cortlandt and trails like the Putnam. From a design point of view, there are surfaces that permit easy use by bicyclists and folks in wheelchairs, and that's very important to my group. Your mission as the city's design review agency and an advocate for excellence and innovation in the public realm really gives you the mandate to reject a proposal that would unalterably change and degrade a precious and rare aesthetic experience for the people of New York. We urge you to reject the proposal.
Thank you. Next speaker is Rich Conroy.
Thank you for holding this hearing on the Putnam Trail. My name is Rich Conroy. I live in Norwood, Bronx, adjacent to Van Cortlandt Park in Community Board 7. Community Board 7 voted unanimously to approve this design, and I would ask the Public Design Commission to also approve it. I'm the Education Director at Light New York. We run free classes and programs, including a summer program for kids in Van Cortlandt. We don't just talk about getting kids out into nature, we actually do it. And frequently, we can't use the Putnam Trail after it rains. There's about a 100-yard, 50 to 75-yard stretch along the south end that runs the entire width of the trail that after today's rain will be a mud bog for weeks, even if it doesn't rain, for another few weeks. It becomes impassable. It boggles the mind that environmental organizations oppose a project that will get more people on bikes going between Westchester County and the Bronx. I don't understand it. But if you hear people opposed to this project, again and again they will say, we don't want to see more bikes, more people speeding through this section of the park. They will also emphasize how natural it is. And while it does have its elements of natural beauty, let's not forget that long stretches of it are adjacent to a golf course on either side and the Sawmill Parkway as you get closer to Westchester County. The issue seems to be pavement. Most of the major trailways in this area of New York State are paved. They go through wetlands, they go right past lakes, they go along creeks. Those wetlands and lakes and creeks are still there. You can hear songbirds singing in the spring and summer. You can see fall colors in the fall. And they're great experiences. I'm talking about the North County and South County Trailway, the Putnam Trail that's also part of this Putnam line, the Harlem Valley Rail Trail in Dutchess and Columbia counties. The Dutchess Trail starts in Poughkeepsie and goes southeast. And across the river, the Hudson River, thank you. The Hudson Valley Trail. All are paved and all afford tremendous amounts of physical beauty. The issue here seems to be people who don't want to see more bikes, using environmentalism as a cover for an anti-bike agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Rich James.
Yep. Good afternoon. stands, I'm a longtime Bronx resident and a volunteer activist with Transportation Alternatives. And, you know, like many of us who's speaking today on both sides of this issue, we've been speaking on it publicly repeatedly. And, you know, when I've spoken, I've talked about the history which was touched on here, about the fact that this was an active rail line from 1881 to 1982, talking about how starting in 1993, plans were calling for the city to take over this right-of-way as a greenway. And that the fact that it connects the paved 50-mile Putnam Greenway North County Trail, South County Trail in Westchester to the paved Van Cortlandt Park Greenway, which in turn connects to Orchard Beach and City Island, among many other places in the Bronx, basically connects into the entire bicycle network. Now, according to the PDC website, your focus is on the aesthetic aspects of a project. And as was shown earlier, you would have approved the previous plan a few years ago. And the changes that have been made to this plan, from the plan that you approved to the present plan, it's very clear that they have all increased the aesthetic quality of the project. And, you know, the Parks Department talked about that with respect to contour and other things of that nature. If I'm going to be intellectually honest, I would say that our friends at the Save the Putnam Trail actually deserve some credit for that, because this plan, I believe, is more aesthetic than the plan that you previously approved, while still meeting the basic requirement of being, you know, forming this key connection, missing link, as was said, in the Greenway network. And I guess I'm going to take my last seconds here to read a statement by Paul Steely White, the head of Transportation Alternatives on this project. To accommodate bikers of all ages and ability and to ensure safe passage, the length of the Putnam Trail must include a paved right-of-way. And Transportation Alternatives fully supports the city's plan to improve this vital commuter and recreational link in our region's growing bicycle network.
Thank you very much. Margot Quorum.
I'm not prepared to speak, although I did submit to you a letter from Parking Service.
Thank you. David Gilman.
Good afternoon. My name is David Gelman. I'm a lifelong New Yorker and Riverdale resident since before the turn of the century, or should I say turn of the millennium. I'm not quite that old. I'm a member of the Van Cortlandt Park Conservancy, as well as Bronx Community Board 8 and its Parks and Recreation Committee. And while I'm not representing them here, given the 7-to-1 vote of the committee and the 25-to-7 decision of the whole community board, I believe that the following comments are representative of sentiment nonetheless. The Putnam Trail is a nearly 50-mile-long railroad right-of-way that was abandoned by the diesel, commercial, and commuter railroads over 30 years ago. And the vast majority of its length was successfully and narrowly paved in Westchester and Putnam counties 10 to 20 years ago, while preserving a dramatic shaded tree canopy. Our parks in general, and the Putnam Trail in particular, must address the quality of life needs of all ages and abilities alike: walkers, hikers, runners, cyclists, skaters, wheelchairs, and strollers. And this multi-user parks plan, researched and prepared by forestry and environment professionals of their NRG section, serves all members of our community. Asking wheelchair users to use a muddy or even a dry crushed stone path for more than, say, 30 yards is unrealistic at best and cruel at worst. In addition, Van Cortlandt Park has a serious dirt bike and ATV problem that will wreak havoc on a stone dust trail, and parks wouldn't have a prayer of maintaining such damage, nonetheless perennial flooding like this. Notably, Audubon New York has acknowledged a year ago and again last month that this plan will not have a significant nor long-term impact on the wildlife of Van Cortlandt Park and will provide access to birding opportunities for the disabled for the first time. Compatible with the Mayor's Vision Zero, this path will safely shelter young families from vehicular dangers and serve the needs of all. And that is the objective of integration with wheeled users. Access to the Putnam Trail for all users to share, alongside all other interested users, not claiming it only for just one segment, which would be an illegal alienation of public parkland. And that is really the point. Personally, I have a car. I can drive my bike up to Hastings, north of Yonkers, to use the paved trail. But most city families do not have a car. Given that it's within a few hundred yards of the number 1, number 4, the B and the D subways, paving this segment will provide access to 50 miles of smooth, flat, tree-covered, traffic-free wheel path to literally millions of New Yorkers. Parks are for all, not just a few. Frankly, I'd be much more sympathetic to the cries of the hiking community if paving were to force them to only use the hard concrete of the naked sidewalks along Broadway. However, I would note that Van Cortlandt Park has over 31 miles of spectacular, nationally renowned running and true nature trails amidst its 1,100 acres. And the proposed paving area is only 10 feet wide for a length of a mile, less than an acre, while the Putnam right-of-way is 60 to 80 feet wide throughout. Realistically, just like how they found the putt by trampling on the abandoned railroad bed, hikers will choose to do so on or alongside the paving. I encourage travelers to go about a mile north of the city line to see for themselves what the while the invasives were thin there, how well the mature trees were preserved.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay, and here are my words and some pictures for you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm afraid I cannot read the next person. I'm going to butcher it terribly. Rodolfo? Rodolfo. And the last name is not happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was good.
You'll take it.
I will.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. I'm actually a person, I'm a disabled advocate. I work at Bronx Community Services. I also live in the Bronx. And I do different type of exercises. I ran the New York City Marathon. So to pave this park, it will give me the opportunity and other people with wheelchairs and strollers, the opportunity to actually, like myself, I'll do exercise and opportunity to stay in my borough to actually practice if I'm going to do a marathon, like I did a few years ago. I did the New York City Marathon. So that would help tremendously. And also to have the opportunity to see the beautiful park, and have that access where if it's muddy, I won't be able to have that access. So I would like to have the same access as everyone else. So I'm for the park.
Thank you very much. Chris Rizzo?
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Rizzo. I'm an environmental attorney. My law firm is a quarter mile down the street. I'm also a citywide park advocate. The park I'm most passionate about is 20 miles up Broadway. I want to read excerpts from a letter that I submitted to the New York City Parks Commissioner in support of the Putnam Plan, in which I copied to the Commissioner of this commission as well. I'll leave a copy when I leave. After many months of further design and review, New York City Parks has presented a plan for paving the existing Putnam Trail to accommodate bikers, joggers, walkers, and the handicapped accessibility. Flanking the trail will be landscape buffers intended to catch runoff and protect nearby wetlands. This design is not perfect, as it does not include an unpaved path for joggers, which was my strong preference. But it is a necessary compromise intended to address concerns about wetland runoff and impact on trees. As a longtime environmental attorney and park advocate, I strongly support the plan. I want to make 4 points. The paved trail will connect Bronx residents to dozens of miles of trails in Westchester and Putnam County, perhaps more. The trail will one day be connected to a new greenway running south out of Van Cortlandt Park along the major Deegan Expressway leading to the Harlem River. Pavement will make the trail accessible after rain, whereas today it is a muddy mess. One of the biggest problems in the park and in the park's wetlands and lake is turbidity. The current unpaved trail strongly contributes to turbidity in wetlands. Implementing the entire master plan, the 2034 master plan for Van Cortlandt Park, is an absolute priority of mine, and the Putnam Trail is a key project in that 20-year master plan. I therefore encourage you to support this plan and vote in favor of it. And I also want to address the issue of maintenance, which is not in my letter. That's a valid concern, but that's a concern with every public project which is presented to this commission virtually. And I can say that park advocates involved in Van Cortlandt Park are currently strongly working right now to develop a better maintenance plan for this park, and you'll hear more about that in coming weeks, months, and years. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last speaker is Paul Mankiewicz.
Thanks.
Good morning, thank you, Commissioner. I am a past president of the Detroit Botanical Society. I am the chair of the Soil and Water Conservation District and one of the founding members of the Urban Soil Institute of Brooklyn College. I built the first 12 of the Mayor's Plan stormwater capture system and about the first 30 of the swale systems in New York City, as well as the only industrial scale stormwater capture system on the Bronx River. This is a beautiful project. But I'm a scientist, and I will speak basically only from the perspective of what's missing. And there's three things. There's three fundamental measures that are missing. Basically, ecological productivity, biodiversity, and basically what goes with that. Zero stormwater capture and zero discharge altogether. That trail will produce 41,000 gallons of runoff for every inch of runoff, every inch of rainfall. That doesn't stay in the park. It won't be turned into the capacity of trees to capture carbon. Everyone needs to get there. It's just a matter of what it does. Has to capture water because that runs the ecological systems. There's dusky salamanders, there's spring beavers, and there's no plan for something like vernal pools. Also, if you don't, the wetlands are partial. If you leave them partial, you're leaving basically an historic input and destructive piece on that park. That is, it was one continuous wetland not long ago. Andy Greller was on a blacklist of Robert Moses for actually trying to preserve the wetlands north of that. We need to make all plans going forward preservation, because if we don't increase biodiversity, if we don't take this, academic botany began here in New York City with John Torrey. We have a list going back to the 1830s of the plants and animals in that park. We need to basically increase the biodiversity around that whole edge, while we're also increasing the water capture capacity, increasing the wetland system, and also bringing people, because people vote, hopefully, for water quality and for the biodiversity of the landscape altogether. So the last piece, there's three fundamental settings. It should be zero discharge, ecological productivity, biodiversity. The other part is ecosystem services. It should clean the water. What it is discharged will therefore be damaging because it's going to go right into the Broadway sewer. It needs to become the body, living body of the park.
Thank you, Paul. That concludes the public testimony. So for members of the public, I just want to say that I've been in this seat a long time, and that was some of the most intelligent, articulate presentations I've ever heard, either for or against the project. But just I want you to know that I'm sitting from many years of listening to people, and I really appreciate your words. So, commissioners, do you have comments?
Well, I think that this greenway is a fundamental link in terms of pedestrian, biking, between the two trail networks on the north side and the south side. And I completely understand both the ecological considerations and the desire to maintain balance in uses. I think that this is not meant to be, this certainly should not be a speedway for any one single use. It really is, it's a park setting, should be recreational, and perhaps there's some ways of, I think that the plan is good in terms of taking advantage of the materials and the topography in order to kind of balance those uses and manage the different kinds of people that are using it. So.
Well, one thing, I'll save my voice. Anyone else care to?
I agree. I think it's a really great way to connect both the north and the south of the same area. I appreciate that it's happy to hear both sides of both the ecological and transportation. I'm sure that making this roadway accessible to more will probably give more voices to the people in the community, so that now, if you have more access, more people will come, there'll be more voices, maybe more funding to do some sort of ecological support afterwards. But I think first and foremost, having access to more people would be positive.
Excuse me. While there seems on the extreme for the groups not supporting this, on one end to say, we'd rather you leave it mostly as it is and make it as good as you can and leave it natural in some fashion that will improve what's already there. The other side is to promote a greater variety of users, and both from bikes to those disabled walkers and so on, and to be able to do that in such a way that will continue to promote ecological diversity and, in a way, the heritage of the place. It seems to me, but maybe I'm mistaken in this, that a threshold question is the nature of the surface. And both parks now and the Audubon Society, as we have in our background, I don't know why the Audubon Society has expertise in this, but they both are saying crushed stone is not going to work in the long run, and it won't because it's not permeable, can't be maintained, and won't be usable after a rain event. I guess I want to be as certain as possible that that analysis is absolutely correct, because if that analysis is correct, the Parks Department is saying the alternative is a mixture of asphalt and the boardwalk. Is that, I guess I've heard Parks, which by the way, everyone did a superb job of explaining themselves. But it seems to me, unless there's other points, that's the threshold of what we have to approve here. And I just want to be as certain as possible that technically, in terms of the possibilities here, that what Parks and others have said is in fact correct, and that there's no other alternative.
Is there someone here from the Parks Department who can speak to that?
Nancy Prince, Deputy Chief for Design. And as you know, we've experimented with a lot of different materials. And you could see in a couple of pictures the puddles that form in stone screenings. And so if we compact it to start out, so it's compacted so it will stay as long as possible, it is not permeable. It's just not a permeable material. And then we do have problems with, in this shady, rainy environment, it would be impossible to keep it accessible. And I think, Chris might be able to talk to that. He's done a lot of paths, and the disabled advocates have, tried a lot of places. And we just want this path to be accessible to the greatest amount of people, to get people out into this park, into the environment. There are a lot of non-paved paths in Vancouver Park, so there are a lot of other alternatives. We just want this one to be regularly. And Margot's the administrator for the park.
I'm both the administrator for the park and the president of Vancouver Park Conservancy. So we have 3.5 miles of stone dust path already, which is our world-famous cross-country running trail. 1.5 miles of it is flat on our parade ground, and then the rest goes up into the hills. It costs, the Conservancy raises about $20,000 a year just to maintain that trail part-time, only during race season. So the costs are there for maintenance, whereas with a paved path, we only have to come in there when it snows and plow it, and that's really it.
So an issue is cost in terms of the selection of the material?
I'm just telling you how
Among
it's maintained.
others.
You were wondering how it's maintained. And the other thing is that it It puddles, because it is impermeable. Like clay, it just gets really solid there. The more people are running on it or walking or biking, it compacts.
Thank you. Just one last thing. I'm sorry, but I've observed and I know a lot of people experience asphalt. Just, could you give me a two-sentence explanation of how, given our concern about permeability now and runoff, how does asphalt satisfy those goals?
So asphalt as a material is not permeable, but
Right.
Alon can talk
That's
about.
that's why I wondered.
So I've talked about all the things we're doing at the edge to control the runoff.
Right.
Exactly,
Right,
yeah,
that's
so,
what I'd like to
yeah, so by having a bioswale on the low side and
Right, I got
engineered to
that.
capture it, that effectively, with the additional 1.5 foot we need for the bioswale, makes it permeable.
Right, so that is, those are the measures
Exactly.
together.
Exactly.
Thank you.
And even with the stone path, it is compacted enough in order for it to be accessible as well. We would need the
You would
same
do a
sort of,
bioswale.
we would need a bioswale anyway in order to
Right.
capture it. Yeah.
Thank you.
While you're up here,
Yeah.
there were two people who spoke, Paul, because I know Paul, and the woman who spoke about the DEC permits, the SWIP permits. Do you have those in hand yet?
No, we're not at the stage to go for the SWIP. And when we went to the community board and as we moved the project along, because there's been a lot of discussion about we don't have a SWIP, we don't have a SWIP, of course we don't have a SWIP.
Right.
And so as we go forward, we will submit the SWIP, which needs almost 100% construction documents ready to the DEC and be working with them. And we will not be allowed to put shovel into the ground until we have their blessing.
And the other steps that were also mentioned in terms of the post-construction monitoring.
Exactly.
All that.
That's all.
Okay.
That's part of the permit.
So I feel comfortable about that. In terms of the question about biodiversity, you presented your tree replacement list. And I certainly do want to correct the individual who said here that you're taking down hundreds of trees. I think actually you're doing a remarkable job of removing trees that are truly invasive, have no habitat value or diversity benefit, and adding 400 and some trees. So I just think that was not exactly an accurate statement. Can you, for your understory and ground cover seeding strategy, I'm sure you could work toward a more robust biodiversity concept with NRG, correct?
Oh, yes, certainly. And we're actually working with the
Very
Staten Island Native Plant Center to develop that list right now. We're in discussions with them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You know, one of the things I really appreciated about a number of the speakers today is that you obviously did your homework and you know that our jurisdiction is aesthetics. And as you can imagine, sticking to purely aesthetics is challenging. Because many of you are speaking from many other points of view. And so, inevitably, there is some commingling of aesthetics and some of the points that each of you has raised, both for and against this project. I am, I think, the only person at this table that approved the project the first time around. Everyone else is a new commissioner. So I certainly didn't want to make any assumptions about the tenor of the opinion around the table. I do think, as the gentleman acknowledged, that there have been a lot of aesthetic improvements made on the plan since it was presented to us back in 2011. I think that they have a whole variety of benefits, some of which reach beyond, again, our jurisdiction, but nonetheless, I feel overall produce a very satisfactory plan. There's no question, as everyone has said, that this is a critical link between the Mosholu and Westchester. And I guess that one of the things, this is, again, I'm stepping outside of the bounds here of aesthetics, but I do have to say that that Van Cortlandt Park is a fantastic park with an enormous number of trails, and that what we should aspire to as a society are as many different kinds of trails as possible. There was a woman who spoke about other forms of rheumatoid arthritis and whether asphalt is appropriate or not, but I think that in the main, what Van Cortlandt Park offers and needs to continue to offer is as much diversity of access as possible. This, above all other paths in Van Cortlandt, is pretty much of a straight shot connecting to greenways. While it's a very beautiful natural experience today, I think that its essential linearity makes it more conducive to be a shared route for bicyclists and pedestrians and some of the other routes in Van Cortlandt Park. One of the things that Commissioner Shinpei and I were speaking about is whether the 200 feet of concrete boardwalk could be distributed. I understand why it's there, and I understand it's to protect tree roots. But it is also a, shall we say, traffic calming device for cyclists and may have applicability in some other locations. So if the budget is tightly constrained, you've got 200 feet of it all belong together, maybe you could distribute that if that is a large concern for users. If not, and it's a well-conceived strategy. So I would just conclude by saying that we are not a quorum today. We cannot vote. It is our responsibility to convey these points of view to the full commission, where that vote will take place presumably next month. But I would just feel it's important that you leave the room understanding that it is my understanding that there is a favorable response for this project on behalf of the commission. I really do want to thank each and every one of you who came here today for very articulate and important remarks. Thank you.